Hi, it's me, Tim Dodd, the Everyday Astronaut. So, just the other day, SpaceX experienced a failed landing attempt of their Falcon 9 rocket. And this was actually a brand new Block 5 booster. It had never flown before. It was B1050.1.1 means it was the first flight of it. I talked about it just the other day on Wednesday. I have a video out. Click here if you need to see that first. But it talks about kind of just an overview of what happened. But that video still led to a lot of questions about how did it end up in the ocean? Why didn't it crash down on LZ-1? What kind of control did the Falcon 9 still have? You can see it fighting for stuff. How much control does it actually have when it experienced the failure of the grid fins? And then, of course, was it safe? All this stuff. And actually, talking about safety, we're not going to really dive super deep into the automatic flight termination system or flight termination today. We'll touch on that for just a second, but I'm really excited to show you what I've got going here. So I'm going to first show you the exact trajectory that it's supposed to take. We're going to dive into how it would normally fly, what these return to launch site missions look like, what the landing process looks like with this, and then I was able to exactly replicate this in Kerbal Space Program, to a T. It's pretty crazy. So I'm going to show you exactly what a normal return to launch site landing would look like, and then I'm going to show you what the ballistic trajectory would look like if the vehicle had shut off mid falling back to Earth, and then I'm going to replicate the exact failure, and it's absolutely astonishing how close it is. So let's dive right in here. First off, this is my friend Declan Murphy, and he has this website called flightclub.io. And I'm a huge fan of this website. It's incredible. He made this simulation software. I support him on Patreon because this work is incredible. I don't know how he does it. I highly recommend, if you find as much value out of this as I do, hop on over to Patreon and support Declan, because this is, get ready, your mind's about to be blown. Here we go. Boom! Data. Now, what is this? I mean, just looking at this, even to someone like me, I kind of understand some of this, but it's still really hard to grasp what's going on. And Declan, man, you're an absolute genius. How do you do this? Okay, so this is cool. That's great, Declan, good job. But this is the part that blows my mind. You can click on 3D visualization, and we can actually pull up the exact trajectories plotted against Google Earth. Look at this. So he goes through and I don't know how you do this other than just being some kind of mad scientist. Okay, so look at this. So it doesn't look like much now, but look, boom. You can see the exact flight path and exact trajectory of what was supposed to happen, and for the most part, what really did happen in this mission. So here you can see there's a red line going up, and then it goes blue, and then it splits off into two red lines. There's a blue red line falling back down, a red line and a blue line. So red line means an engine's firing, at least one engine's firing. It means it's accelerating. So you can see here the first stage accelerates for about 2.5 minutes, and then it does that coast phase where it's stage separating, and then the second stage ignites, and it continues off into orbit, and you can see that just perfectly here. Look at that. Declan, man, this is such a great visualization. I just love it. But now the first stage, on the other hand, does that boost back burn. So we can see it lighting up, the two lines split apart, and the first stage starts to kind of fly retrograde almost. It's trying to point itself back towards land. It's not pointing itself at land, actually. It's pointing itself just short of land. And what's going to happen is, of course, now the upper stage and the payload's detached, so the vehicle doesn't have nearly as much work to do on the way back down as it did on the way up. It's burned through 70% of its fuel. It's a lot lighter. It takes a lot less to slow it down. And now the atmosphere is working with it. So in order to land, it doesn't require nearly as much energy as it did to get up. And of course, you can think of this upper stage as almost like the first stage is hucking the upper stage towards orbit. Then once it's up high and moving really quickly towards this direction of travel, the upper stage puts itself into orbit. It does another 6.5 minute burn or so, and then that's how it gets into orbit. Meanwhile, the first stage though comes falling back down. Now you can see there's a red line. That's going to be the entry burn. I still think it's the re-entry burn. SpaceX used to call it the re-entry burn. Now they switched it to entry. The vehicle was in the atmosphere, leaves the atmosphere and comes back in. To me, that is a re-entry, not an entry. So that's the re-entry burn you see here, and it does that to slow itself down before it hits the atmosphere, so the atmosphere doesn't destroy it. And then you can see a little bit of a kink in this. And that, my friends, is the dogleg maneuver. So notice it's blue line, that means it's coasting. So the propulsive landing stops, and all of a sudden you see it start to kink over. So if the vehicle after the re-entry burn, or even before the re-entry burn, were to fail and totally shut off, it would fall straight down. It wouldn't have this dogleg. This dogleg is due to those grid fins starting to bite into the atmosphere and starting to tilt the vehicle over and aim it back towards land. We have really good footage of this. I think my favorite footage is from NROL 76. That was in 2017. And you can just tell, you can see how much the vehicle is doing this dogleg and how much it kind of can almost fly through the atmosphere. It's really, really cool, and it needs the grid fins to do this. So if there's a failure in the grid fins or a failure in some other system, it's just going to go boop right down following its ballistic trajectory. It's these grid fins and, a little bit of the nitrogen thrusters too that help point it towards LZ1. Okay, now while we have this pulled up, it's probably a good time to really quickly touch on the automatic flight termination system, or the flight termination system. And what this is any rocket that flies, and any rocket that's flown almost ever, has a flight termination system that's typically watched over by a range safety officer, someone literally with their hand on a button, and they watch the trajectory, and they watch the actual telemetry of the rocket, and if it leaves a predefined flight corridor, they make sure, if at this point this turns and goes this way, boom, nowadays it's automatic, and if it automatically exceeds that certain corridor, or basically like a cone of where it should be going, it will blow itself up. And that's true on descent as well. So say that boost back burn would go too long, and all of a sudden it gets beyond what's safe. As soon as it crosses that threshold of oop, you shouldn't have burned for that extra 3 seconds, boom, it will trigger, and it'll release all of the extra propellant that's on board and explode. It will completely get rid of that. That's a lot of energy there. So it's a lot safer to ignite a rocket in the air, purposefully self-destruct it, get rid of all of the combustibles, the high energy combustibles, before it impacts the ground. Because if a rocket impacts the ground full of propellant, that's bad. That's very bad. That will throw shrapnel and shockwaves and a ton of energy and be a very, very bad thing. But meanwhile, if you do it in the atmosphere, in the upper atmosphere, it kind of breaks apart, gets rid of all the propellant, and it just kind of will rain small bits of shrapnel down. I know it's not a great constellation, but it's really not nearly as dangerous. And if you like watching rockets go boom, you're kind of sick, but I get it, it's a bit of a morbid curiosity. I do have a video called Biggest Booms of Spaceflight History, and we do explain what went wrong in all of these different explosions with rockets. I love that video. It was a lot of fun. Definitely check that out if you want to see more about this. There's a link here, there's a link in the description. Okay, but back to the Falcon 9, and specifically when it's doing like a boost back burn, it physically is, if it were to do a boost back burn for slightly too long, it would get terminated. It's not going to go too far and all of a sudden be over Titusville or, over Kennedy Space Center. It would get terminated before that happens. So as soon as it crosses that certain threshold where it's like, oh, you're accelerating towards populated areas or onto Cape Canaveral Air Force Station or something, it gets terminated before it does that. So that being said, the last opportunity really the Falcon 9 has on its way down that could potentially throw it towards something is that re-entry burn. So the re-entry burn, once it does this re-entry burn, you'll hear them call out on the radio. You might be able to catch it. I know you can catch it on the SSOA mission that was just 2 days before CRS-16. You hear them make a clear call out that the first stage booster flight termination system is safed.
Will happen, followed by touchdown.
And that's because after it does that re-entry burn, that's kind of the last time where, say, it came at a super weird angle and started to shoot off towards the horizon, it would need to be able to self-destruct itself. After that point, though, it's already coming so close to the ground, the actual area of where it could impact is a pretty small cone. It physically can't go that far, you know what I mean? So you'll see more of this play out here in Kerbal Space Program. You'll see more of it here. Let's fire this up in Kerbal Space Program and let's actually dive into this. It's crazy how similar it actually is. Okay, so what I did is I actually created a mission using Kerbal Space Program's Mission Simulator. And look at it, actually, I placed us right here. This would be as if we had just done the boost back burn and we're beginning to fall back to Earth. Now this makes it so that we're purposefully going to fall just short of the land. And this is very similar to the actual trajectory that the Falcon 9 booster takes. And so look, from here it almost looks like we're going to fall short initially, and we kind of would. And what I'm going to do here though, let's fast forward quick, and we're going to get to the entry burn here. Okay, so I'm actually going to be manually flying this, but I'm going to hit the same numbers every time I do this just so we have something. So at 60,000 meters, boom, we light up 3 of the 9 Merlin engines. And we intentionally I'm actually burning just holding straight down instead of exactly retrograde. This makes it so that we still keep some of that horizontal velocity that we're going to need. We're going to need to increase that horizontal velocity so we can do that dogleg. So I'm slowing down before we really hit the atmosphere here in Kerbal. And you can tell I'm gonna stop at 400 is the number that I stopped. It seemed on this mission to scrub off about 2/3 of its velocity on the way down. Before it hit the atmosphere. So this is just kind of a rough estimate. Again, I just wanted to make sure we had numbers we could replicate over and over. And now at this point, I'm going to tip it over and I'm going to start trying to fly it. Now this is the cool part. This is the dog leg. And from here it looks like it's, crazy steep. It's really only, a couple degrees off of its angle of attack. Yet you're going to start seeing as the atmosphere gets thicker, it's unbelievable how much you can actually dogleg over. And this is about exactly what the Falcon 9 does. And now, Kerbal, to get the physics kind of close, especially with I'm using the space shuttle main engines, to use just one, the vehicle needs to have a little bit more aerodynamic bite, and this is all stock physics in Kerbal Space Program. So in order to make it fly a little bit better, there's a few wings hidden inside the fuselage so that the fuselage has the right amount of lift. There's also some air brakes to help increase the drag in the vehicle, just to make it so we can simulate this closer to how the Falcon 9 actually functions. Because that body, the fuselage, actually has a lot of lift. Now, this is where I began the entry burn. And in this case, I scrubbed off a little bit of extra vertical velocity by using that engine gimbal to tilt it a little bit more. But now I'm just following the retrograde. I'm following the exact trajectory, and that way it'll scrub off the horizontal velocity, but it's also scrubbing off the vertical velocity. And I'm just eyeballing this. I'm kind of taking a look at, there's the suicide burn distance calculator up there in the top right. Even though it's negative right now, you need it to be a little bit negative, because it shoots up and down all the time, especially as the atmosphere changes. It's not the most accurate thing in the world, but now I'm just giving it full beans, letting the landing gear come out, and voila, we're about to have a pretty decent touchdown there. Look at that. And now you can kind of see there's a fly around here. You can tell about how far we made it in. We made it lined up with the big markers on the runway that far inland. Good enough, I think, as far as Kerbal Space Program goes. So next, let's actually take this thing and do that exact same flight path again. Since it's the mission simulator, I actually did a quick save. And we're going to turn off, after the entry burn, we're going to turn off all stability control and see what happens when it just follows its ballistic trajectory. Okay, so just like before, I did the entry burn starting at 60,000 meters, and I'm going to slow it down to about 400 meters per second. And at that point, I'll kill the engines, and then I'm actually just going to kill everything else. I'm going to turn off stability control, turn off RCS. This would be like if, a major malfunction happened. Where is the booster going to end up? And this is pretty accurate, So the grid fins would freeze at this point. But even up here, the grid fins don't have that much attack. They don't have that much control. So currently, they are locked into just the dead zero position. They're zeroed out. And watch what happens. There's SAS off. There's no more nitrogen thrusters. This is a dead... It's almost like the batteries got disconnected or something. This is a dead rocket. And where do you think this is going to end up? This is actually pretty surprising because notice, due to the grid fins having a decent amount of atmospheric drag, And because the engines and the bottom portion of the booster is the heaviest, the center of mass is very low. The center of lift is really high. The center of lift is up at those grid fins. And so it wants to almost stay following the retrograde marker here. You can see, so it's still actually kind of, heading towards land. It's not like it drops straight down. It's going to follow a little bit of that horizontal drag over, which means it's still going to kind of creep towards Kerbal Space Center in this case, but it's going to come up short of the land. It's going to come up significantly short of land. And that just shows how much those grid fins can do that dogleg maneuver, pop it over to land, and now you just see it's going to have a little swim. And in this particular flight, you can tell, look at how fast it's going. So this is terminal velocity. It's just a pencil falling out of the sky, a 15-story tall pencil. There it goes. Nice little dunk in the ocean. Bye-bye. That's the worst case scenario, at least as far as the final landing, all the maneuvering. So here is what would happen. So what I did is I went back into the vehicle assembly building, and I'm intentionally going to make it wonky. So what I'm doing is I'm taking pairs of grid fins, and I'm going to kind of make them sporadically different, because the grid fins can all act together if they all move on the same, like this. That's going to induce roll throughout the whole vehicle if all four of them are doing that same thing. But sometimes they act symmetrically, like this. And in that case, it either can produce pitch or yaw. So if they all work in unison, like this, that's actually unison. It's not mirrored. That's how you induce roll, but you can induce pitch or yaw. So two of these are stuck in a yaw position, and two of them are stuck in a roll position. So you can see two are the same and two are opposite of each other. And I'm just kind of guessing that that's the failure we saw, because basically what happened, because the pump that controls the grid fins turned off, it had a malfunction, it shut down, they were stuck wherever they were. So if at the time the computer was saying, hey, you need to point yourself this way, two of them could have been starting to work on some yaw or pitch, and two of them could have been doing a little bit of roll. And then especially as it started to roll a little bit out of control, all of a sudden, they kind of cranked over at one point, and then it just locked there. And so what my best understanding is of this entire system is initially through the reentry burn, through the boost back burn, and then the reentry burn, it's kind of almost slowly creeping closer to land. And after the reentry burn, it retargets and really then does aim to land on LZ1. But I don't think it's like, I don't think it's totally dynamic. Like, it's not necessarily saying at any point, like it can't relight the engines again if it came up short the first time, or anything like that. So I think the boost back burn targets a certain thing. Then it kind of does some fine-tune adjustments with the RCS and the atmosphere. You can kind of see that sometimes. And then once it does the entry burn, it kind of sets the target again, and it changes its target now to be the landing zone. So either landing zone 1, or in the case of a ballistic trajectory landing out of the drone ship, it targets itself to now retarget that. Because I think they intentionally, especially with these return to launch site landings, intentionally initially target short, so that if anything goes wrong, it does what we're going to see here. So again, I did that same 60,000 meter burn. That's where I started the entry burn. And I'm going to cut it off at 400 meters per second in velocity. That scrubs off about 2/3 of our velocity. And now the grid fins, I actually turned off the ability for them to move. So they're stuck in this wonky position. But here's the thing. The rest of the vehicle still has control. So the RCS, the little control thrusters at the top of the booster, still have the same amount of control. The gimbaling of the engine still has the same amount of control. And it's going to still try to point, notice it's trying to point itself at land. And I'm also holding the stick, trying to induce more of that pitch to let it do more of the flying, just like the computer would. The flight computer is trying to target it. You can actually think of it all. This is probably not the nicest thing to say, but it is basically a ballistic missile. It's a missile falling out of the sky, and it is now setting its target to LZ1. But now notice we don't have control over it because those grid fins are stuck, and we're starting to get in this spin. And occasionally you'll see kind of wild oscillations even because some of those grid fins are stuck in other positions. But now watch it. It's going to actually start getting tighter and tighter and tighter. And I ended up going as the engine's going. So now the engine fires up. So the engine gimbal has some control now, but it's a single engine gimbal. A single engine does not have roll control. It takes at least a pair of engines in order to induce roll through the z-axis of a rocket. So if you have two engines, you can spin them opposite like this, and that will make the rocket spin. But the landing burn on this mission in particular, and on most return to launch site missions, is a single landing burn. These are when you have enough margins, it's easier. There's a lot more wiggle room in these landings when you have room to do a single landing burn. It's a more aggressive suicide burn or hover slam when you try to do the 3-engine landing burns. So this mission was a single landing burn. So that means the center engine didn't actually have control. Now look at this. This is almost exactly what we see with the videos we saw from land. You know, again, my friend Das Valdez had that video, and then SpaceX released the video. And in real life, when the landing legs came out, it killed virtually all of the roll due to the conservation of angular momentum. So just like a ice skater, you know, and voila, you see it. Mine broke apart. Boo. Boo, Tim, you don't make good rockets. SpaceX makes way better rockets. But that's actually pretty amazing that the booster survived tipping over like that. Mine wasn't quite so fortunate. Poop. But back to angular momentum. So when the landing legs deploy, you know, just like if you see ice skaters and they can slow their spin down and then speed it up by bringing their arms in, or if you're on a chair like I am, I'm not going to do it right now, but if you were spinning really quick with your arms tight and then you extend your arms, you slow way down. Like you can almost stop. And I think that's exactly what happened with this booster. Once those landing legs deployed, you can see all of the z-axis roll basically canceled out instantly. And people were saying, you know, is it because it's going slower and the grid fins don't have as much control? I don't really agree with that because watch some of the F9R dev or the Grasshopper launches that SpaceX used to do when they're learning how to do kind of the landing burns. They're going really slow, and they pop out their kind of first generation grid fins, and you can see even going like not even at all fast, like really slow, like a crawl, how much roll they can induce with those grid fins. So I don't think it's a matter of the airspeed was low enough, because the air's really thick down there. Those grid fins have an insane amount of control. They're basically like the elevators and the rudder of a plane. You know, they can at that speed still do a lot. So I don't think it's that, you know, the grid fins were going slow enough that it killed off the roll. I think it's more that the conservation of angular momentum with the landing legs deployed, and therefore it stopped rolling just as it's about to touch down. So to sum up, really, the booster had virtually no chance of making it back to land because the mechanism that mainly gets it over land are those grid fins. So if those grid fins fail, you know, if they're locked out like they were in this case, it's going to fall basically straight down. Now, of course, that brings up the question, like, what if they're jammed and it flies, you know, way off? It really probably, no matter how jammed they are, and no matter what configuration, it probably physically cannot fly much beyond LZ1. I'm sure there's a reason why they have that aggressive dogleg maneuver, and I'm sure there's a reason why they point it just short of LZ1. I'm guessing that even in the worst case scenario, it could maybe fly in another kilometer or something. Hans mentioned that it knows not to target buildings and things. It knows where those are. But in this case, with the little amount of control that the vehicle actually had at this point, the safest thing for, you know, it to do is in the ballistic trajectory that they programmed in. They made it so if there's a failure, it almost no matter what's going to fall where it's going to fall. So although, yes, I'm sure the vehicle is smart enough to know where it is and try not to hit the vehicle assembly building or something like that, at the same time, it's pretty much destined to follow its ballistic trajectory at that point, because there's not that much it can actually do. The most it can do is make it over to LZ1-ish, maybe a little beyond, you know, margin of error type of thing. But I don't think it can all of a sudden, whoa, and it's going to shoot off and, oh no, Coco's now gone. Titusville, I loved you. I don't think it has even the remote ability to do that. And that's not necessarily, again, thanks to the flight of the vehicle. and the flight control, that's more due to the programming of where it initially targets, and then it's retargeting towards land. Again, that's just kind of me speculating. If you guys have more input on this or more questions, please let me know in the comments below. I am very curious. We still have questions to answer, like, you know, now they're talking about maybe adding a redundant pump. What's that do as far as their certifications for NASA to fly humans? Will that affect the certification program? It sounds like this was the second flight with the upgraded COPVs. I didn't know about that. That's awesome. They need 7 flights of a frozen design in order to fly humans, according to NASA. So SpaceX is very prone to tweaking constantly. So NASA kind of was like, hey, you guys need to stop tweaking for a bit. Make sure you have a solid rocket. And as far as the customer goes, as far as NASA's concerned, this mission was a complete success. They don't care if SpaceX doesn't land the rocket. That's not anything to do with NASA. That's in SpaceX's best interest. So what NASA paid for was to get the Dragon capsule to the International Space Station, which it's on its way doing now. The landing is really only advantageous and really only matters to SpaceX because they want to reuse that booster. So it's really the financial case of, well, here we go. So all in all, again, to sum up, we still don't know about that. And I'm excited to see what that's like. And the other thing that I'm surprised, this is again, just me speaking very openly, I am surprised that this is the failure we saw. That we saw a failure of the grid fins. I always thought that I was nervous for the day that one of the engines doesn't light up. Because that is a one-shot thing. You know, when you're coming in that fast, if the center engine doesn't light up and you're doing a single engine landing burn, you're screwed. And I don't know what kind of backups and processes they have to make sure that that T-Teb is able to ignite the engine in the last second. I don't know. But if I were to place a bet on what failure we would see for a landing of a Falcon 9, I thought it would have been the engines. The grid fins, titanium, you're beautiful and I love you. And I'm excited to see that hopefully now they will get them fixed. So I hope this answers all your questions. Again, let me know if you have any other questions. Sorry for rambling so long. I just figure I'd just kind of openly talk about this stuff because it's cool. And again, it's one of those fun opportunities to watch and learn together. And that's always fun in my opinion. So yeah, thanks for my Discord channel for chatting through this with me. It's been a lot of fun. If you want to join our exclusive Discord channel, please head on over to patreon.com/everydayastronaut. And again, all the music in my videos is original. I finally released an album called Maximum Aerodynamic Pressure that's available everywhere. iTunes, Spotify, check it out. It's been in the background of this video the whole time, so if you like it, download it. There's also a playlist here on YouTube that you can listen to. It's pretty chill background music, so all right, everybody, that's going to do it for me. I'm Tim Dodd, the Everyday Astronaut, talking grid fins with you here today, bringing grid fins to Earth, just like CRS-16. All right, bye, guys.